As a doctor working with high-performing men, the peptide question I hear the most is almost always the wrong one, because men, they ask me, which peptide should I take? The better question is, what problem am I actually trying to solve, and is a peptide the right tool for that? Because as you can see, most online camps are split, right? The first camp is peptides are a miracle drug. You can inject this and everything will transform and everything will become better. And then you have the other side, which is completely opposite, right? They say peptides are nonsense and the whole category is fake. Now, both of them are completely wrong. So peptides are not fake, because some of the most important medications we have in this day and age are either peptides or peptide-like drugs. But that doesn't mean that every compound being sold in a clinic or in a research drug use only vial is right to put into your body. So in this video, I want to give you a physician level filter, and I want to help you ask 3 simple questions. The first one is, what's real? What is promising but not proven? And then what is mostly hype? And how should a serious man even think about some of these peptides, right? CJC, ipamorelin, BPC-157, TB-500, MOTS-c, the list goes on, right? AOD, the list will go on. And how should you, as a serious man, even think about this? And if you want a 1-page decision matrix, I've made a free guide that you can download. It's probably going to be in the first link in the description. Just let me know what you wanted and I'll send it there. Now, I'll expand on myself a little bit, because I am a medical doctor and I work with usually business owners, execs, consultants who want to be the best version of themselves, right? So I want you to imagine a man that I usually see. And it's often the same picture that I get, right? He's early 40s, he's successful, he has access, and he's made good money already, right? Maybe he's tried supplements, maybe he's using a sleep tracker, maybe he's even doing TRT, and if he is doing that, I hope he's doing his blood test, and maybe he has a coach, a personal trainer, a sort of performance coach, some of these things, right? Now for him, usually in his life, he's always looking for the next tool to increase whatever his output has to be, right? So now peptides for him looks like that next level. Maybe he's looking at recovery peptides for injuries. Maybe he's had an injury since he was in university and college, his early 20s, right? And he's finally wanting to repair that now. Maybe he wants to take something like GH for sleep to improve his sleep. Maybe he's looking at some of these GLP-1s for his fat loss, right? Maybe he's looking at MOTS-c to increase mitochondrial signaling. Maybe he's looking at GHK-copper because he wants to improve his skin and his hair and maybe his joints as well, right? So for him, this seems like the most logical next step. And on paper, it looks sophisticated, but underneath, it's not a sophisticated question at all. Because maybe his libido is going down. His body composition is switching, so he's putting on more fat and losing muscle mass. So maybe his weight is the same, but he's looking way different. He could also be tired, and he could feel like his training response is now weaker. And so because he's used to solving problems using better tools, he thinks that this better tool is going to help him solve whatever issue he's facing. And that's the exact trap, because the intervention is not the strategy. A peptide is an input. It's not an interpretation. And so better tools do not fix a primitive decision system. Now, first, let's separate the category from hype, right? Because the peptide category is real. Peptides are real. We have insulin. We've had insulin for a long time. And insulin is a peptide hormone, right? GLP-1, which is also a peptide, has a real function and is a real part of the incretin system. These are FDA approved and medically approved medications for use in the day-to-day setting, right? But if someone says a peptide stack will fix and transform you completely, your joints are going to be as good as they were when you were 20, you're going to have your hair back, you're going to burn all your fat, you're going to build more muscle than you've ever done, that's simply not true at all either. And so here's the filter that I want you to use, because there are 5 levels, right? You have the first level, which is approved medication. Insulin, it's a peptide, it's approved. We also have the GLP-1s that we just mentioned, right? That is, for example, Wegovy. It could be Mounjaro, it's Ozempic, some of these fat loss drugs. They're approved. You can definitely use those. And then you have level 2, human outcome evidence. And here you have compounds who have meaningful evidence, but they're still specific to a certain outcome. Then you have level 3, which is either animal or cell evidence. It looks good, but we still need human data. And then we have the mechanism only, which is the 4th ladder, right? Here we're looking at it from a biological perspective in terms of mechanism. So is the mechanism, does it make sense? It could make sense, but we probably don't have the clinical trial data for it. And it sounds plausible, but plausible is not the same as proven. And then we have level 5, which is the marketing story. Here you have some of these elaborate marketing mottos and transformation stories, all these things that you hear where the marketing is probably way ahead of the medication itself. And so most men don't actually know which level they're dealing with out of these 5 because they hear words like recovery, fat loss, libido, sleep, mitochondria, collagen, growth hormone, inflammation, longevity. They hear all these words and they think that the evidence is clear and it's on the same level. But the truth is, it's not. And so before any peptide conversation, I really want 3 questions answered. The first one being, what is the actual bottleneck? Because if a man wants better recovery, it could mean 10 different things, right? He could have 10 different problems. He could have poor sleep. He could have low energy availability. It could be alcohol, that he's drinking too much. Maybe he thinks that he's drinking okay, but he's drinking too much, and that is the main issue. He could be working out too much. He could have low free testosterone, which could then be caused by something else underlying, right? He could have thyroid issue, so his metabolism is simply too low or too high, could be the same thing. Glucose control could also be an issue. He could have prediabetes. That could be a huge factor to him not being able to recover properly. And then stress, right? So I like to, when I work with the guys that I work with, I like to work from what I call the foundation, which is diet, it's exercise, it's sleep, and it's stress management. If you don't have your stress management on point, your stress physiology is going to harm you. Because he could be, like I said, he could be 44. He could be running 2 different companies. He has his 2 or 3 kids. He has his wife, all the obligations at home and at work. He's only sleeping 6 hours and he's trying to train like he's 24 years old. Now, tell me how all of that makes sense and how having all of these issues would be solved by one peptide. Maybe it would. Most likely it wouldn't, right? So if you don't know the bottleneck, the peptide becomes the expensive guess. So this brings us to question 2, right? Because what evidence level are we even in? Biological plausibility does not equal proof. And this is what the internet really loves, right? You could have someone say, this compound activates AMPK, or this compound does something to mTOR. This compound affects collagen, and the list goes on and on. There is biological plausibility. You think the mechanism makes sense, and it could make sense, but that simply doesn't equal that it has an effect in the human body. Take MOTS-c, for example, right? Mitochondrial signaling doesn't equal settled therapy. So if you don't know what MOTS-c is, it's something that's secreted in your mitochondria as you do exercise. And so what people are saying and selling this as, it's exercise in a bottle, right? It sounds great. Maybe it works, but just because we think we know how it works doesn't mean that it actually does the same thing in the body and it has those long-term effects. It could do in the future. It's just very important that you understand which kind of clinical evidence level we're in. Then you have GHK-copper, which is, some people call it a miracle drug, right? For skin, for hair. But the issue here is people, they compare studies made with injections compared to studies where they only do an application, a topical gel, right? And those 2 things are simply not the same. Because injecting a peptide or simply putting it on your skin locally is not the same thing. And then you have maybe some of the most popular and most well-known peptides, right? BPC 157 and TB 500, where their recovery reputation, it's simply not the same as clean human evidence. And you could argue we'll never get proper human evidence for example, BPC and TB 500. And there are different reasons for that. That's for a whole different video. But again, just understand which kind of evidence we have before you make any of these decisions. And so this leads us to question 3, right? Because what's the downside if you're wrong? What about manufacturing quality in some of these third-party compounding pharmacies? What's the purity? What's the route of administration? Is it topical gel? Is it an injectable? What is it, right? What about your immune system? How is it going to react? What if you have cancer history? What if you have cancer in your family, right? What about your fertility wishes? Do you want to have kids within the next 3, 6, 12, 24 months? What about other medications? Do you have sleep apnea, right? What about prediabetes? What about your metabolism? What about other hormones? You have to think about these things as well if you are wrong, because you could be wrong. Because if you say, I bought it online and the forum said it was fine, you're simply gambling with your health. And so this is also one of the reasons that I made my peptide overview guide and decision matrix. It's not going to tell you what to inject. I would never do that. This is obviously not medical advice at all. This is only for education and information purposes. But it tells you what to think through first, right? The category, the evidence level, the bottleneck, and the downsides before you even ask yourself the peptide question. And so if you want that, it's probably going to be the first link in the description just below. So here is the rule that I really want you to remember, right? The baseline first rule. If you're thinking about peptides because you're tired, you have low libido, you're gaining fat, and you can't put on muscle, right? Mentally, you might be flat. You need to know what system is already failing before adding another signal. Because like I say here, peptides can hide bad thinking, right? Adding a new signal is not the same as solving the root cause. And so this is how I like to really see things, right? I like to go look at first principles, try to solve the root cause. Now, if we solve your symptoms or we only try to heal your symptoms, maybe we didn't solve the root cause. And then your issue is just going to persist or come back later, right? So this is what I'm trying to say here. Always go for the root cause. Try to figure out what the issue is, what system in your body is actually failing before adding another signal, which a peptide basically is. And so what are those signals, right? If you have a low androgen signaling, low testosterone, a recovery peptide will not fix the whole problem. If you have low testosterone, you have to deal with that first, right? If you have untreated sleep apnea, a GH secretagogue is not going to be the right thing for you. And it's going to be way too premature. And then if you are on TRT, but you still feel flat, the missing piece may be interpretation and not another compound. Now look at it the other way. Maybe your glucose control is not as good as you want it to be. Maybe you're pre-diabetic. Maybe you do have diabetes. And then a GLP-1 agonist could be the solution. But then again, you're simply masking the problem. Now, you could help yourself maybe by taking something like Wegovy or Mounjaro or whatever, right? But again, I would want you to try to fix the underlying issue, which gave you that lack of glucose control in the beginning. And so this is really where most men lose. Not because they're stupid, but because they're using advanced tools inside a primitive decision system. Now let's talk a little bit about the common peptide claims, right? Because GLP-1 drugs are not the same conversation as gray market recovery peptides. Now, GLP-1 based drugs are the clearest example of a real medical category with major human evidence for weight loss and metabolic improvement. But that doesn't mean they're the right fit for everyone, because the evidence level for gray market recovery peptides is simply not the same. And here I'm talking about BPC 157 and TB 500. Where they're high interest, right? They're high demand and people really want them. And it makes sense. Everyone on Twitter, everyone on Reddit are talking good things about them. You have all the anecdotal evidence, but it's simply not the same as having the medical data that we have from, for example, the GLP-1 trials. And so people usually hear the claim of what it's going to do, but they don't necessarily focus on what the evidence level is. And so the category map really, and which kind of questions I think you should ask yourself is really here, right? For GLP-1s, you should ask yourself first, is fat mass or appetite the bottleneck? For recovery, you have BBC and TB 500, right? Ask yourself, is this injury? Is it sleep? Is it load? Or is it hormones? What's the main issue? For your GH axis, where you have CGC and you have ipamorelin, ask yourself what monitoring is actually needed, right? For mitochondria, we have MOTS-c that we've talked about a little bit. Ask yourself, is the human outcome evidence strong enough? MOTS-c is very exciting, right? Because of the exercise mimetic and the mitochondrial story. But a serious man has to ask himself some of these questions first before simply injecting it into himself. We could go on. Skin and repair, where we have GHK copper, right? Or topical, cell, and injectable claims. Are they being mixed? Is it the same? This is what I mentioned earlier in the video. If you inject yourself or if you just use a gel, is it going to have the same effect? Probably not. And then we have libido, right? Sexual function compounds. Maybe you should focus on why you even have low libido to begin with, right? Is it because of no sleep? Is it too much stress? Is it hormones? Is it medication? Or is it metabolic health? If you fix that, maybe you wouldn't have low libido and you wouldn't need peptides. And so the whole point here is peptides are not one category. You see how many different peptides there are and how many different categories there are, right? And just as many different peptides there are just as many different levels of evidence to them. And so now let's talk about the mistake that smart men make. Because information is simply not integration, right? Maybe you know Peter Attia, maybe you know Andrew Huberman, and I have respect for both of these guys. Maybe you're reading a bunch on Reddit, maybe using ChatGPT, whatever, Claude, right? Maybe you even got your bloods done and you listen to all these and you read all this information, but you still don't know what to do. Because what you have, or what people like some of these have that do all of these things, they have fragments. They don't have a hierarchy. Now, in my work, I've helped men double their testosterone levels. I've helped them lose 10 kilos while gaining muscle. I've helped them wake up at 6 a.m. after years of feeling a physical struggle just waking up. And I've helped men become present with their families again, being able to play on the beach with their kids while their wife is looking at them happy again. And so the most important part here is not one marker or one compound. It's the interpretation of the whole. Because you have symptoms, right? You have your labs. Maybe you're not sleeping well. Maybe you're sleeping okay. Your training, your exercises. How heavy are you working out? How much stress do you have? How is your libido right now? What about fertility wishes? Are you taking any medication? And what about your risk tolerance? All of these things have to be read and analyzed together. This is what most men don't do correctly. They just have fragments and then they don't know what to do, which makes sense. Obviously, you wouldn't know because you're not looking at this from a holistic perspective. And this is exactly what the internet can't do for you. And so here is my practical rule for peptides. If you have a clear indication, you have strong evidence that's tested in humans, and you have oversight, it's worth a serious medical conversation. If you have early data, for example, from trials, and you might have a bit of weak outcome evidence, it's definitely interesting, but it's not proven. So just understand that. But if a peptide is being sold through fear, through secret protocols, even hype, or miracle claims, right? This peptide is going to fix everything in 2 hours. The marketing is probably ahead of the medication. And again, if you don't know your baseline, I would always start with that. Don't start with peptides. Start with the bottleneck. Because the best compound in the world cannot compensate for the wrong diagnosis. You don't want to major in the minors. And again, this brings us back to the fundamental, right? The foundation. Diet, exercise, sleep, and stress management. You want those 4 on point. At least try that before looking at peptides. Now, if you do have that and you're still interested in peptides, I have built this free peptide guide with a decision matrix. It's very easy to read, and I've put in usually all the peptides that most people know. Obviously, it's not going to be all the peptides, but it's going to be the most popular peptides with the categories. So start with the matrix, find the category, the evidence level, and the bottleneck within yourself. And if you're a high-performing man, maybe you have more money than you have time. You could be a business owner, you can be an executive, a consultant maybe, and you want someone to look at this who does this every single day from a holistic perspective and interpret it in the context of your labs, your symptoms, your performance, and your actual life. You can also apply for a health audit or performance review. It's going to be one of the links in the description below as well. But don't start by asking which peptide should I take. Start by asking which system am I trying to fix. That question will save you time, money, and probably a few bad decisions. Now, if you got this far, you should probably watch one of the videos that are linked here in the top that YouTube thinks you'll get the most out of.